Recently, I received a comment from a viewer who shared some very common thoughts and questions that I see all of the time in my comment section and coming from Christian apologists regarding intrinsic human value and moral values, kind of an all-in-one. Basically, do humans hold intrinsic value? And if so, where do we get our objective moral values from? Where do we get our intrinsic value as humans from? And so I responded back to this person, and I did not give them this kind of well thought out answer. I just kind of quickly responded and went back and forth. But I read back through the comment, and it really does kind of encapsulate the very common Christian apologetic response I get to being an atheist. And it's this question of what makes human life objectively and intrinsically valuable. And so I thought it would be interesting to read through this comment. I might not read the entire thing because it's kind of long and it gets a little bit redundant, but I want to read through it and address some of these thoughts, these questions and concerns, because this person starts off their comment by saying, I have a question that atheists cannot answer. And though I think what they mean is that they haven't found someone who gives them an answer that is sufficient for them, I figure if they have not found an atheist that can answer this, I like a good challenge. So I am an atheist, and I am going to attempt to answer these questions and concerns. So I want to read through the comment. Again, I might not read the entire thing, and we'll talk about it. So they say, I have a question that atheists cannot answer. What makes human life objectively and intrinsically valuable? What makes it objectively and intrinsically wrong to murder other humans? Christians and theists in general can easily answer this question by saying that humans are God's most special creations who were created in his image and likeness. From an atheistic, naturalistic worldview, humans have no creator, and we are just animals who existed and evolved because of naturalistic causes and explanations. Therefore, from an atheistic and naturalistic worldview, there is no actual reason as to why murdering people is objectively and intrinsically wrong. For what makes us different from animals and other living and sentient organisms? Murdering people is wrong because we humans have sympathy for members of our fellow species, some atheists might say, but that still doesn't explain why murdering people is objectively and intrinsically wrong. There's no possible way to explain why human life is objectively and intrinsically valuable, other than humans are God's most special creations that are made in his image. The existence of God, the existence of a creator, is required to explain why human life is objectively and intrinsically valuable. I want to start off by responding to the very last sentence. I actually want to start at the end because it really kind of ties everything back around. It says the existence of God, the existence of a creator, is required to explain why human life is objectively and intrinsically valuable. And I agree. I actually agree with that statement that you have to have the existence of God or a creator or something outside of us that is required to explain why human life is objectively and intrinsically valuable. That's true. Because for something to be objective, it has to exist regardless of human opinion. So it's like when you go to jump off of a building, unless you have a parachute, you're going to fall to the ground. You're not going to fly. And it does not matter if you go up to the top of the building and you think, I believe I can fly. That does not matter because it is objectively true that gravity will pull you down and you will fall to the ground. That is just an objective truth that exists regardless of what your opinion is on it. So in order for something to be objective, there kind of has to be something outside of us determining it to be so. And so when it comes to value, like intrinsic human value is such a subjective thing. We all have our own ideas of what is and isn't valuable, and some people will find things to be more valuable than others. But when it comes to intrinsic human value, there must be something outside of us that gives us that value that would make it objective and intrinsic. But what I'm here to argue is I don't think that they necessarily need to be intrinsically and objectively valuable to hold value subjectively in the minds of other human beings. It really is my position that because we are human beings, living in this existence that we all experience subjectively, from our own perspective in our own minds, that the things that we give value to, the things that hold value, are given by human beings. Humans decide within their own minds, either individually or collectively, that certain things are valuable and certain things aren't. What we're really doing is we're looking at the world through two completely different worldviews. Christians really like to use this term worldview, that they have a different worldview than everyone else does. That's what they always told me in youth group. And I grew up and I realized that difference in worldview is really just a cognitive dissonance, but they're calling it a different worldview. But things have to be black and white, boxed in, absolute, objective. Everything has a who, what, why, how, because. Everything has a reason. Everything has an objective source. My worldview does not look like that. In my worldview, we're living in a subjective world with our own subjective experiences. Now, I'm not necessarily arguing that we're all just brains in a jar, and we're all just kind of experiencing our own reality. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I think that it is possible there are objective values beyond us, maybe. But that's really complicated. That's a really complicated topic, because something outside of us could find something to be valuable, but I could still think it's not valuable in my subjective mind. And so then is it objectively valuable? I don't know. But I know that the reason Christians use this argument, what makes human beings intrinsically valuable? They're trying to get you to admit that something has given us this intrinsic value. Something has decided that objectively humans are valuable. And this can kind of get a lot of people caught up, especially if you were born in Christianity, if you were raised and indoctrinated into it. You were born into this very kind of boxed in black and white mentality where there is a why and because and a how to everything. It can be really difficult to think outside of that and to see things subjectively, to be willing to view things as if they are subjective. A lot of times you want that absolute, you want that source, that objective source, and that just might not be available. But to Christians, that is how the world works. When they're having these conversations and they're saying, well, don't you think we have intrinsic value? Don't you think it's wrong to kill people? Don't you find value in human beings and therefore don't want to kill them? Well, where do you get that idea from? How can you decide that anything is intrinsically valuable? You can't. Well, no, I can't. I can't, but I can decide if something is valuable to me in my own subjective mind. But they're going to want to get you there so that you can say, oh, well, yeah, I guess it is wrong to kill humans. And I guess humans do have this kind of intrinsic value and we all just kind of know it. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess if we have like this objective intrinsic value, then something had to have given it to us, then yeah, God exists. And then they're like, ha, see, God exists. Now let's get you to the Christian God. So this is just kind of a precursor to getting you to the Christian God. And it is just a tactic to get you to that point. It's kind of like used as a gotcha. But if you can kind of stop them before they get there and admit that, yeah, things are subjective, as unclear as that could be, as abstract as that could be, things are subjective and value is subjective. Well, now they're going to open up a whole new can of worms. And we'll get into that with this comment here, because he immediately goes from saying what makes human life intrinsically valuable, but then he says what makes it objectively and intrinsically wrong to murder other human beings. When you recognize the subjective nature of existence, then you no longer have to appeal to objective sources from where we get our ideas and our morals and our values. We are allowed to have subjective opinions, and those subjective opinions can matter. They can hold weight and value in the society that you live in. When you get together as a group and discuss your subjective ideas about what is good, what is bad, what is valuable, what is not, you get together and you form that. It evolves from the mind sharing with other minds, coming together as a collective and working together to create these systems of morality. And I think it's really important to differentiate what an individual values, what an individual finds to be moral, from what a group values, what a group finds to be moral, because those can be two different things. We can have our personal morality, the things that are valuable to us, the things that the rules that we kind of set up for ourselves that help us live our own best life. But then we can also separate that from the ethics that we want to apply to our group. And we can see that there are certain things that we might find to be immoral or unethical to us personally, but might not be bad for other people to do if done responsibly and done in a group. So, for example, a Christian might say that for them, it is unethical or immoral or a sin to have sex before marriage, that is just not something you're ever supposed to do. It is always wrong. You don't cross that line. And that can be their personal boundary for their own personal ethics. But at the same time, they could recognize that not everybody holds that boundary. Not everybody thinks it's immoral to have sex before marriage. And some people think that it's actually a good thing to have sex before marriage so that you're not getting yourself into something that you don't really want to be in long term. You're not committing to something that you don't fully know or understand. And so a Christian, if they wanted to kind of separate those things, they could say, okay, so for me personally, I'm just going to not have sex before marriage. That is just not something I want to do because for me, morally, that's just not okay. But I can recognize that other people don't find that to be immoral, and that as a group, I wouldn't want to impose my own personal boundaries on other people, especially if those things that I don't do aren't hurting people when other people do them responsibly. If people are having sex before marriage, if they are being responsible, if they are being consensual, they're not hurting one another. And so if other people can do it respectfully, responsibly, consensually, and it not hurt people, then, we have a totally different set of ethics for the personal and for the group. So this is how we do this, right? When they talk about like moral values, where do you get your morality from? That's a big complex topic, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But when it comes to determining moral values and deciding together, that's what we do. We decide for ourselves, and then we come to the group. And as a group, we talk about it and we work through it and we vote. And sometimes the group votes against your own personal ideas and boundaries and morals. And that's just life. That's just the way it goes when you live in a subjective existence. Not everybody's going to disagree because it's all just coming from our own thoughts, opinions, and ideas. However, I think that there is a way that we can kind of make somewhat objective conclusions about morality, value, well-being. And so that kind of brings me to morality. Where do we get these moral values from? Why have we decided that human beings specifically are so valuable that we must protect them, we must give them rights, we must not go out and murder them? If it's all subjective and it all comes from one's personal opinion and mind, and one person says, I think it's terrible to go out and kill people. But then another person says, I think it's a great thing to go out and kill people. Well, if it's just subjective, then this opinion holds just as much weight as this opinion. And they're both just on equal footing. So who are we supposed to listen to? Who's got the right moral code? You don't have a source. You can't say who's right. So it's just whatever anybody wants to do. In your system, atheist, everyone's just going to go around murdering people and they're going to call it right and there's nothing you can say about it. Ha! Gotcha, atheist. That's what they say. But in his book, The Moral Landscape, Sam Harris makes a great case for how science can determine our moral values. And I definitely recommend this book for anybody who's kind of struggling with this issue of morality and ethics. It really lays out a really kind of simple, practical framework for how we really can determine moral values if we have a specific end goal of well-being. Now, when we talk about morality and ethics, when we talk about human rights and how to treat others, I think most of us are kind of envisioning this idea of well-being. I think that typically the goal in most people's minds, even if they're not really like consciously thinking it out, like the end goal is for people to be well. Why do we treat others nicely? Why don't we just go out murdering people? Well, because we care about well-being. And if well-being is the end goal of morals and ethics, then we kind of can determine objective moral values with respect to that end goal. So, for example, when it comes to your physical well-being, we can use science to collect data, to run tests, to research, study, peer review, do the whole thing to determine what does and doesn't make someone physically well. Your diet, your activity, your stress, all kinds of things contribute to your physical well-being. And we can and have used science to determine how we can make people physically well. And if we can do that, then I think that we can also and have also used science to determine how people can be mentally well. Now, mental health is a newer, kind of study, and we're still learning so much about emotional mental health. But there are people who dedicate their time to studying mental health and to trying to figure out what makes people mentally, emotionally well. And so if we can use science to say, okay, this makes someone well, this makes someone unwell, well, then there's our guideline for determining how to treat other people. And that's going to be incredibly complex and nuanced, and it's not going to be clear cut. There's not going to be a straight answer. It's not going to be black and white, and it might differ from person to person. It might be relative based on the circumstance. But I mean, isn't that also within, the moral system within Christianity? There are still nuances. It's really not as black and white as they want to present it to be. They say don't steal, never steal. That's a sin. Well, what if you got to feed your family? What if your kid is starving and you got to run into the grocery store and steal an apple so your kid can eat? Is that a sin? Is that wrong? So obviously, there are definitely situations where it's nuanced, it's complicated, it's not clear cut. And so if you can allow that for Christianity, I think you can allow it for the secular world as well, and I do. But there is a great cognitive dissonance in the minds of Christians when they talk about morality and well-being, because it's almost as if when they talk about morality, when it comes to here on earth, how we treat each other, how, the laws that we create, when we're talking about that, I think Christians are in their mind thinking about well-being. But when it comes to God's moral system, acting morally within this kind of divine realm, I guess you could say, or spiritual realm, it changes. Morality is no longer about what makes people well. It's about what God says is good, what God says to do. And to me, that doesn't sound like morality. It sounds like obedience. And so I think Christians have to completely redefine what morality is when it comes to God's system, his system of what is right and wrong, what is sin and what glorifies him. That no longer has to do with well-being. It doesn't have anything to do. It has to do with if God is praised, if God is glorified, if God is happy, and if you're being obedient. So I'm not sure that the alternative system is much better, but we will get to that in a minute. Now, I want to kind of jump back and kind of talk about where these moral values come from. Because let's say we can get the Christian to kind of understand our point that, okay, well, life is subjective. We all kind of determine our own moral values. Most of us, the everyday average person, I think we're all kind of on the same plane with our moral values for the most part, especially like the bigger ones, like not going around killing people. Most of us don't go around killing people because we don't want to. Well, if we can get the Christian to that point, the Christian is probably going to say, and they did in this comment, say, well, where does that come from? You're not giving me a source for why, you have these moral values. You're just saying that you have them, but where do they come from? And I respond often and I say, well, I think it's my empathy. I think it's my empathy for other human beings, my ability to put myself in their shoes, to understand what it feels like to have a bad time, to go through bad things, to have bad things done to you, and not wanting to promote that, not wanting other people to feel that way. And the Christian usually follows and responds and says, well, where does your empathy come from? They want the where. They don't care that we can actually come to moral conclusions. They don't even care that we can come to the same moral conclusions that they come to. That we can both agree. I'm a non-Christian, they're a Christian, and we can both agree that murder is wrong. It doesn't matter that we can both come to that same end goal. They really want to know the where, the how, the why. Because again, this is not about morality. This is about just proving God exists, right? That's the whole point of this conversation. It's not to explore this complex topic of moral values and intrinsic human value. It's about proving God exists. And so they just want you to be able to provide a source. And if you can't provide that source, well, then you don't have any ground to stand on. You got nothing in the eyes of the apologist. And so they say, well, where does your empathy come from? And I say it evolved. It evolved as a natural biological process, as a means for survival. Most of us have empathy and don't want to go out hurting other people. And when we promote an environment and a world where we're not hurting and harming people, then it's a little bit more guaranteed that we ourselves won't be hurt, at least not by the people we're interacting with. And so we know, kind of like with a deep-rooted knowing, not like a surface level knowing, but this kind of biological evolutionary knowing, that when we create a world that is well, or we do the best we can to create a world that is well, then other people will also create a world that is well for us, and we will coexist peacefully. It's biological, it's evolutionary. Again, they want to know where the empathy comes from, but want to ignore the fact that we got the empathy. The empathy is here. Whether it came from a God or it evolved, it's here. We have it. So now what do we do with it? But they're looking past that. They don't care that we all arrived pretty much at the same place when it comes to value or human values, moral values. They just want the where, the why. And I don't think that God gave it to us. I think that it evolved, and it actually makes so much more sense that our empathy evolved and it is biological than God gave it to us, because if God did give people their empathy, he missed some. There are people who are born without empathy. There are people who are born psychopaths or sociopaths, are both? I'm not sure, but there are people who are born without the ability to empathize with other people. There are people that are born without the ability to really know right from wrong, or really understand why right from wrong is, right is or wrong is. So if there are people that cannot empathize, they just don't have it in them because they have a psychological blockage going on, well, then God created them without empathy. So he didn't give everybody empathy. He decided that some people just didn't deserve it or didn't need it, or he just forgot. I don't know. But it makes so much more sense that the empathy and the things we have, the reason we value, the reason we want humans to be well, like that is just an evolved biological process to make sure we all survive. And it missed some. And that makes a lot more sense than God gave us all empathy except for a few. So I say all of that, and a lot of Christians, apologists, are not going to accept these answers, okay? And that's okay. We're going to see things differently, kind of going back to that worldview. They have a very different worldview than I do. I can totally, completely appreciate and relate to this need from the Christian or the Christian apologist to get the why, the how, the source. I get it. I am that type of person too. I'm an incredibly curious person. I got in trouble so much growing up for asking why. I was always asking why. I wanted to know the why of everything. I wanted to know the how. I wanted to know why things were. Where did these rules come from? I was a very curious person. I still am a very curious person. And so I get it. I get it when they say, well, I just don't get it. It just evolved. Like, where did it come? Why do you place so much value on humans? Why do you have these moral values? Where do you get it from? I get that mindset. I do. But if that is the Christian response, and the answers of evolved empathy and our subjective nature, if that doesn't work on them, well, now let's look at the alternative. Because Christians are saying, this is not sufficient for me. What you're giving me is not sufficient for me. I have a better system. I have a better understanding of this system. I know where our value comes from. I know where our moral values come from. Let's examine their system and see if their alternative is any better. Because they claim that God is the one who gives them their value. Actually, in this comment, they end it by saying, in conclusion, there's no possible way to explain why human life is objectively and intrinsically valuable other than humans are God's most special creations that are made in his image. So this person is saying that There's no way to explain that we're valuable other than God created us and he is the one that gives us value and we're just so super special, made in his image. But I really want to push back on this idea that human beings are valuable to God, because I don't think that they are. And I think biblically we can see over and over again that human beings are not valuable to God. We look at God who creates humans solely for his glory. He creates human beings just so they can serve him, love him, glorify him, praise his name. That is their purpose. It is the whole duty of man according to the scriptures. And so that in itself, our value is given to us because God wants a lot of glory. So our value is found in the fact that we exist to glorify God. And that's okay that he finds value in that. But in my subjective opinion, I don't find that to hold any value. I'm only valuable to praise God's name. I don't have value just in who I am as a sentient being. My value is only in God's glory. And not only that, but God created me, told me that I had to worship and adore him and love him according to the doctrine, and then threatens to punish me, toss me into eternal torment, torture, annihilation, whatever it is you believe about hell, threatens to just extinguish me, either torture me forever or extinguish me. And either way, I don't hold value. If God is not going to keep every single human being alive and well and thriving, and he's just going to toss them in some capacity into hell because they didn't worship him, they didn't believe in him, didn't follow him, then they don't hold value. They're not valuable to God. If something is valuable to you, you don't just toss it. And that's exactly what God threatens to do if we don't obey him. As a non-Christian, God plans to eliminate me. And even if he annihilates me, even if he just snaps me out of existence, he is showing that I hold no value. Because if I did, he wouldn't extinguish me. So to tell me that as a human being, I am intrinsically and objectively valuable, and that's because God created me and God is the one that gives me my value, well, God doesn't treat the things he values very nicely, because he demands that they worship, praise, and adore him, and then threatens them with eternal damnation if they don't. I don't see the value in that at all. And not only that, but over and over again, God shows that he didn't value humans throughout the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, how he treated his people and how he treated people that weren't his people, how he told his people to treat people that weren't his people, to go out and kill or enslave them, to take their women and children as plunder, drowning everyone in a worldwide flood because he didn't like the way they turned out. That's not valuing humanity at all. And so again, like we've talked about in previous videos, Christians are redefining words. They are twisting reality to make the doctrine fit, to make their God fit how they describe him when it doesn't add up. You have to change what it means to value something to say that God values humanity, that he gives us intrinsic value. And at the end of the day, isn't really our value just subjective to God? Where does God get his objective value? Does he give it to himself? Subjectively? In his own mind? Decides that he holds value? How is that any different from me being born a sentient being and deciding what holds value for me? It's subjective. It's all subjective. And Christians don't like that answer. They don't want that answer, but the alternative that they're providing is not any better. And then they say, well, where do you get your moral values from? How can you decide what is right and what is wrong? And I say, well, where do you get yours from? And they say, God. And I say, the same God who drowned everyone in a flood, the same God who cursed Adam and Eve and all of their descendants for eating a piece of fruit, the same God who encouraged and instructed his people to enslave other people and to beat them within days of their life. That's the God you get your moral values from. And they say that I have to provide a source for my moral values when I'm saying that I think it's wrong to commit genocide. I think it's wrong to enslave people. And my morality is being questioned by these people that worship a God who did those very things. The alternative that the Christians provide is not any better. It's not more moral. And the system they provide is not morality, it is obedience. They don't care about what is well for others, how others are doing. They only care about what God wants. And if God wants it and it makes people unwell, they don't care. It's like Abraham and Isaac. And God says, hey, go take your son up to a mountaintop and sacrifice him to me. If Abraham was responding morally, he would say, no, we don't do that. It's not moral to kill your own kid. But Abraham didn't do that. He wasn't acting morally. He was acting in obedience. And that is the shining star story that Christians tell to kind of instill these virtues in people. Faith is a virtue. Be obedient. Have faith like Abraham. That's not morality. They don't offer an alternative moral system. Their alternative system is obedience. And then they dismiss our moral system because we don't have a source. When we all live in this subjective reality and there might not be a source. If there is an objective source, we don't know it. We don't know anything about it. It has made itself unknown, and it has left us to fend for ourselves, to subjectively determine our moral values, to determine within ourselves what we hold value in. And that's just how it is. And that's what I would say to the Christian that argues with, that's just the way it is. It's the same thing they would say to me. Well, you don't like God's system. It doesn't change it. It's just the way God created it. That's fine if they want to believe that. But I believe our world is subjective. We're living in a subjective reality. And therefore our values, our moral values, come from our subjective mind. And thankfully, biologically, we've evolved to have empathy and to want a system where we are all well. And so that's easy to do sometimes, to come together and, get 10 people in a room and ask them all, is it wrong to go out and murder people needlessly? And I'm betting, unless you've got some kind of a sociopath in there, all of them are going to say, yeah, I think that's pretty messed up. I think that's wrong. And they might come from all different faiths, all different backgrounds, all different religions, but they can agree on moral values, because when we come together as a group, we can talk about these things and we can decide together. We can change one another's minds. We grow, we evolve, our morality changes, and that's just life. And the Christian might not like that answer, but they're not offering any alternative moral system, and they're not offering any kind of alternative reason that we have intrinsic value other than, well, God wanted to create us for his own glory, and it makes him really happy. And it doesn't matter how we feel about it. It doesn't matter what we want. It doesn't matter how well we are, how happy we are, how genuine and authentic we are. It's all about God and his glory, so you better fall in line. Subjectively, I hold no value in that. I think that about wraps it up, and I thank you so much for joining me today. Please like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts. That helps me out in the algorithm, boosts me out so I can get my video shown to more people, and more people who are deconstructing can see this kind of content and kind of open their eyes and get a new perspective and think about things. Everything I say here is my opinion. That's just the way it goes. It's my subjective opinion, and I'm sticking to it until I change my mind, and then I'm not sticking to it. And that's just the way it's going to go. And apologists are just going to have to deal with that. So again, thank you for joining me. And yeah, I'll see you next time.